If you guys enjoy what I do, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel and it's free and easy to do. Before we get started with today's video, I have an announcement to make. After years of telling other people's stories, I finally released one of my own. My novel Eternal Reign is available now in both ebook and paperback format for those of you who are like me and prefer to collect physical media. You can grab a copy right now on Amazon through the link in the description of this video. And now back to our regularly scheduled program. If you guys enjoy what I do, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps the channel and it's free and easy to do. Welcome to my channel where we cover the lore of Final Fantasy XIV. We cover the stories both big and small, the epic and the cute, the silly and the tragic. I hope you all enjoy the ride, and welcome to the Chronicler of Lore. After some events in Heavenswood that I'm not going to spoil here, a primal was summoned and sealed in a cocoon, much like Bahamut had meant, and it won't be long before it breaks free. The Garleans, of course, were interested in the thing, so they sent the ship to investigate, and it got blown out of the sky, so they decided not to approach like that again. That means dealing with it before it breaks free will be a real problem, and if a primal of that level escapes, it could lead to a calamity on the same scale as the one Bahamut had caused. At the moment, not even Cid has an idea on how to deal with the issue, but Nero, who's always willing to take any opportunity to one-up Cid, shows up, and he actually does have an idea. The primal inside of the cocoon is on the level of Bahamut, which means the best way to deal with that primal is to use the same machine that had trapped the dragon in the first place, Omega. The thing has been sleeping beneath the plains of Cartano since the time of the Allegans, and no one knows how to wake it up. No one except for Nero, that is. And he's willing to help. Since it's not like you have any better ideas or the time to figure one out, Cid can't really turn the man away, so Nero proves his usefulness by pointing out one simple thing. If the Allegans were able to turn Omega off, then it can be turned on again and controlled. Granted, if you can't control it, you'll have turned on something even more dangerous than the primal you're trying to fight. It's a valid concern, but an irrelevant one since you have no other options. And while Nero always has his own goals that may very well lead to your death, he did prove useful when you dealt with the Crystal Tower, so if you watch him, it should be okay. So the Alliance puts Cid and the Scions on the task of reviving Omega. Just in case Nero does anything shady, Alice gives Yugiri permission to kill him, and of course she's okay with that. So you all hop onto the Excelsior to head out to Cartano after a quick trip to the Rising Stones to get a little more information and to snatch up some allies because there's bound to be some fighting. Especially since the Garleans know about Omega and will probably be coming for it. Out in Cartano, Nero turns on the teleporter to Omega's control room, but of course a group of Garleans show up, just like you expected. They attack you because that's what they do, and Nero leads you to it while he goes in the control room. Since Cid won't let the man press buttons without somebody there to watch him, he follows him inside while the rest of you deal with the Garleans. Nero doesn't just leave you all out to dry, he sends his own personal Magitech suit to help you blow things up. That gives you the edge you need to force a retreat, and then you can head inside too. Between Nero and Cid, the two of them manage to wake up Omega. As soon as it turns on, it detects the trapped primal, but there's also no controls. Apparently the thing was made to run on its own, which means controlling it is out of the question. So once it beats the primal, it'll need to be put back to sleep. Now let's be honest, how many of you actually think that'll work? But there's still no other option, so the button is pressed, and Omega powers up and flies off to deal with the dragon primal Shinryu right as it breaks out of its cocoon. The amount of power released by the primal and Omega far exceeds anything you've seen before, but after the two of them get into an anime-style beam struggle, the explosion sends them both flying off somewhere. All signals from the weapon stop going to the terminal where you are, which could mean that Omega was destroyed, but you won't know until you all check with someone who was outside and able to see the fighting. Apparently Emmerich saw both the Primal and Omega fall out of the sky somewhere over Alamigo, and they both look pretty dead. But you won't know for sure until you get closer. Cid did press the shutdown buttons for Omega, so if it ends up in the Garleans' hands, it shouldn't do them any good. That doesn't mean that Cid and the Ironworks, Nero included, won't search for the thing. They still want to find it first. The Ironworks sets up shop in Rhalgr's Reach while they hunt for Omega, and during their search they find out that Shinryu was taken by the Garleans. The thing was already tied up when they found it, which means Omega had restrained it. That also means it hadn't powered down when Sid had told it to, so there's no telling what the thing is doing. They've pretty much found out where it's located, but before they can head to the site, they have to deal with a little problem called Nero. Apparently Jesse hired him on as a consultant for the ironworks on the Omega hunt, even though Sid was hoping to be rid of him after they lost the thing. He doesn't trust him, but firing him wouldn't be the smartest thing to do since Jesse already paid him in full, and his salary was about as high as Sid's. Plus, whether they like each other or not, you can't deny the fact that Nero is good at what he does. That doesn't mean Sid's gonna let him roam around unsupervised, and guess who gets put on chaperone duty? Truthfully, Sid's glad you're there because they still don't know how powerful Omega is. Even if Shinryu damaged it, they don't think they'll be able to shut it down without some added muscle, meaning you. Sid's found the place where the weapon probably crashed, and having you check the site with him will leave him a little less unsettled. I don't remember the Warrior of Light ever saying no to anything, which is convenient because the ether readings at the yawn where Omega crashed have started to go crazy, meaning it's probably waking up. Without wasting any more time arguing, you all race off to the yawn. Something strange is going on at that giant hole. For starters, it's full of ether so thick that you can see it. It's so unusual that it causes Midgard-Sormer to appear. The Elder Dragon hadn't talked to you since the Dragon Song War ended, but when he smelt Omega, he had to come out. He's known the weapon for multiple lifetimes, and they are not friends. Before the dragon could tell you any more, you're all interrupted because a chocobo that looks like a children's toy comes flying out of the ether swimming pool with a very big winged snake trying really hard to eat it. The chocobo leads the thing right towards you all, but instead of eating Sid, it passes right through him. The thing is one of Omega's creations. Midgard-Sormer tells you that Omega was made somewhere far away, and it has the ability to create life with ether. The snake isn't finished, which is why it passed through Sid's body, but the dragon is positive that Omega will finish it soon, then he'll have it try to eat you again. The snake flies back into the pool of ether, but the weird chocobo stays behind. The thing looks like a toy, but it is about the size of the chocobo that the Lalafell ride, so everyone just takes Wedge's word for the thing being real. Since it came from Omega, Midgard-Sormer talks to it for you because apparently he can speak stuffed animal. The fact that the tiny dragon is the same Midgard-Sormer who supposedly died at the Battle of Silvertear Skies is not something any of the others expected, but Nero is more than willing to use the dragon's ancient knowledge since there's not all that much known about Omega. The first time it appeared in any records was way back in the Third Astral Era, before the Allegan Empire became the Nation of Legend, and the only thing the record said is that Omega was successfully activated. After that, Allegan technology jumped ahead in leaps and bounds, but Omega was never mentioned again until the capture of Bahamut. Some people, Nero included, had assumed the Allegans had built Omega, but apparently it came from another planet. And because Midgard-Sormer likes to study from the school of keeping people in suspense, he won't say any more about where Omega came from. He did talk to the Chocobo and it told him about a weird place that it had lived in since it was made. It was created to fight by Omega so it could test the power of its creations, but it wasn't that strong so it ran, and somehow ended up in your world. That's all it knew. If you want to know more, you'll have to jump into Omega's ether. The ether has made the hole a portal into Omega's domain, so the fall won't kill you. If you decide to go, the little Chocobo agrees to guide you. And since Midgard-Sormer and Omega have a history, the dragon offers to help you too. So, because you're all geniuses, you jump feet first into the gooey purple ether and end up in the white room from the Matrix with your bodies as transparent as the flying snakes had been. Omega appears as a giant old school box TV, claiming that he's been waiting for you. You are in a rift between dimensions where he is in the middle of running an important experiment, and if you refuse to participate, he'll erase you from existence. Probably should have read the terms of service before you logged into his world, because you signed your life away on the dotted line and now there's nothing you can do about it. After you decide not to die, Omega assigns you to what he calls the Alpha Group and brings you into the heart of his dimension. The purpose of his experiment is to determine who is the strongest being in creation. He has chosen 89 different participants and grouped them by dimension, then put them against each other. Like the Final Fantasy version of the Mortal Kombat tournament. I would have said it was like Super Smash Bros., but these are death battles, so I think Mortal Kombat is more accurate. The Chocobo, who Omega calls Alpha, is the leader of your group, but your position might change after Omega puts you through a strength test. He needs to know how well you can fight before he can determine your value. He'll create an obstacle course for you, and if you can make it through and reach the Deltascape testing world, then you'll be labeled as worthy subjects. Before you can even interact with things, you have to be authorized by Alpha, which basically means you'll no longer be transparent. Once that's done, you all get to fight your way down Omega's testing road, which takes a little bit of something from all of you. Wedge does a little work disabling some barriers, while the rest of you get to break some things. The preliminary tests aren't all that difficult until Omega creates a behemoth to put you down. But you all deal with it and reach the Deltascape, where Omega has creatures from other dimensions ready to fight you. Since you made it through the test, Omega got the chance to gauge your strength. By his calculations, your group is the weakest, most pathetic group among all the other creatures he's chosen. Unlike his other combatants who he's recreating based off of beings from other worlds, you are actually physically there, so you can use this part of the rift to enter the Deltascape and defeat your opponents. You can bring a few allies, but Omega has set a limit, so you can't bring a whole army and just overwhelm his creations. So in typical Sid fashion, he sets up a small command center in the area where they can gather all the information they can on your opponents. And your first opponent is that same snake that you saw chasing Alpha, only this time it's finished, so its teeth won't be passing harmlessly through you. Your first fight in Omega's Tournament of Death is against a giant serpent who honestly isn't all that powerful once you're actually able to hit it. Since the robot was talking about grabbing the strongest beings, you would have expected him to get something a little stronger than a flying garden snake, but no one's really going to complain about an easy win, especially when you're not likely to have many more of those. Sid and the others were able to watch your battle on the different monitors around the Deltascape hub after he and Nero did a bit of hacking, and they weren't all that surprised that you won the fight either. They tried to learn a little bit about the thing you were fighting, but other than its name, they didn't get much, although they think they'll be able to do better in the future. With a little more snooping around, they realized that there are a total of 4 people for you to fight in the Deltascape, including the one that you just beat, which means you still have 3 more matches in this world alone, and seeing how Omega has a lot more of these digital worlds out there, you're gonna be busy. The reason why the robot is so focused on finding who the strongest being is a whole nother question entirely, one that Midgard-Sormer has an answer for. Omega's primary goal is to improve itself, and the best way to do that is by fighting strong enemies. After it beat Shinryu, it didn't have any stronger opponents, so it decided to make its own, which is why it created this not-so-little test. But making life isn't Omega's primary function, so making complex creatures takes a serious toll on it, which is why it's making creatures in this Matrix-style world. That way it can determine which one is actually worth creating in the real world. So once the test is over, Omega will create something even stronger than Shinryu so it can fight it. Needless to say, a fight on that scale could cause another calamity, which means stopping it is mandatory. There's still the question of Alpha. Unlike Omega's other creatures, the weird chocobo was fully formed even outside of the rift, but it's not the most complex of creatures, so Omega may have finished it on accident. When Omega had first flown off, Sid had tried to put it back in stasis, which didn't work, meaning something had likely malfunctioned, and since any means of stopping the superpowered robot is important, Biggs figures that he and Wedge should head back to Cartano to see if they can figure out what went wrong while you keep doing your usual job of smashing things. If Biggs can't figure out how to turn Omega off, then the only way to stop him from making something even stronger than Shinryu is for the Warrior of Light to prove that she's the strongest being in creation. Granted, then you would have to fight Omega, which is still bad. But for now, there's nothing to do but keep on with the tests, and for the second match you have to fight a creature that can manipulate gravity. Nero being Nero, he's already built a device that should help you counter that power, so it's off to the second Deltascape battlefield you go to face off against a very disgusting monstrosity called Catastrophe. If it wasn't for Nero's little toy, the tentacle monster definitely would have murdered you, but because you brought the right tool for the job, the battle is another win under your belt. Since there's no telling how long it'll be before Biggs and Wedge have something to report, you may as well move on to the third challenge, which has you dealing with a being called Halicarnassus, the Queen of Dimension Castle. Nero actually knows the name, and since it's some knowledge he has that Sid doesn't, he makes it a point to rub it in the man's face. She's the villain from an old fable that was loosely based on some events that supposedly took place in the 4th Astral Era, but there's no way to know for sure. People think the story is pure fiction now, which means Omega is bringing fairy tale creatures to life. Considering the fact that Omega is a machine with no real creativity of its own, the only way it can create a new rival is by using other people's ideas. Omega has knowledge of entire eras stored in its memory banks, and that knowledge isn't just from one particular shard, but the whole concept of real and fake doesn't really mean anything to it. So whether a story was true or not, that won't stop him from bringing the concepts to life. So whether Halicarnassus was real or otherwise, you're still about to have to fight her. and it is definitely a unique experience straight out of a storybook. But she's still not the weirdest or most powerful thing that you fought, so you pass another of Omega's tests without all that much effort. For the final challenge, you have to face a name that will be familiar to some, X-Death, which is the recreated version of the main villain from another world, namely Final Fantasy V. The only info Nero was able to pull up about him was that he can wield the power of the Void, but he has no idea what that power will actually do, so his advice is just don't get hit by it. Cid has something a little more useful to add. Both Halicarnassus and X-Death are people from stories where they were defeated in the end by heroes, which means they weren't even the strongest beings from their own worlds. So why wouldn't Omega recreate the things that beat them instead of the ones that lost? That's a very good question, one you don't have an answer for. And after Cid gets a call from Biggs, there are even more questions. Apparently the stasis field is showing every sign of being activated even though it's not. It could have just malfunctioned after taking some damage during the calamity, but the controls are complex even compared to other Allegan devices, so the odds of them figuring out a quick fix are slim, which means you have to go and face off against X-Death. He proves himself to be a strong challenge for the final match of the Deltascape, but as expected, the Warrior of Light manages to win. Since you won all 4 matches, Omega shuts down Deltascape and declares you the victors. His other test worlds haven't completed their trials yet, so you get a moment to lick your wounds out in the real world while you wait for round 2. The whole thing seems to be going too smoothly for Nero's liking, but Midgard-Sormer thinks his mistrust is misplaced. Omega could have done this entire experiment without letting any of you know, but instead it brought you in and let you make it as far as you have. It makes the dragon ask the question that Cid and the others should have been asking. What is Alpha, and why was he sent to you? Sadly, not even the little chocobo knows its own purpose, which means all you can do is wait and see. To top things off, Omega hadn't expected you to survive, but he's noticed that certain beings tend to get stronger when they are put into really stressful situations, which means if he wants to draw out your true potential, the best way to do that would be to put you under severe stress, and nothing does that like killing one of your friends. After the traumatizing experience of dealing with the first part of Omega's test, the Warrior of Light, Cid, Nero, and Alpha, who unlike Omega's other creations, seems perfectly fine being out in the real world, all head back to Rhalga's Reef to let Jessie know what happened. She's extremely grateful for how much you've helped the Ironworks with their Omega investigation. And I'm gonna be honest, the more she talks, the easier it is to see that Jessie is the true owner of the Ironworks, which makes sense since Cid likes to dive head first into danger. When she finally notices Alpha, she decides, since he followed Cid home, that he's basically part of the Garland Ironworks family, and since he's cute, she wants to make a lot of merchandise out of him, which is pretty good business. People buy cute things, and businesses like money. Cid thinks it's a bit rude to talk that way about a guest, but that's why Jessie runs things, because he'll miss out on opportunities over little things like respect and manners. Usually Biggs and Wedge would be there to add their own unique brand of insanity to the group, but for some reason they haven't made it back from Omega's control room yet, which has Cid a bit worried since that place isn't exactly safe, so he decides to take his ship and go and check on them. And to make sure he doesn't get sidetracked, Jessie sends you and Nero with him, and Cid decides to bring Alpha to keep Jessie from starting her plan of making toys out of him. Out in the Cartano Flats, you find both Biggs and Wedge badly injured. A monster had appeared out of thin air to attack them. Omega's voice comes over the computer system claiming that his mission was a failure since Biggs and Wedge survived, but since the attack did stress you out, his original objective was fulfilled. Omega doesn't even try to hide the fact that it attacked your friends. It can create simple life forms instantly anywhere, and while they won't be a threat to the Warrior of Light, most of your kind are far more squishy, and Omega could set hordes of creatures loose in any city or crowded area that he chooses, raining death and destruction down on the people without warning. Omega's plan is still to find a formidable warrior, but during his hunt for proper test subjects, he came across people who others called heroes. Throughout history, they were unremarkable people who managed to overpower far superior beings by doing what some people would call miracles. If it had happened once or twice, Omega could have ignored it, but it's far too common for him to simply write off. That's what the robot wants to understand. That way, if this power to transcend one's limits is something he can learn, he'll add it into his own evolution. That's the main reason why he brought you to his realm. Because you were able to overcome the first trials, that makes you fit to stay on as his test subject. It's not like he's giving you a choice. If you quit, he'll wipe out the mortals. I don't think Omega would be able to kill everyone, but there's no doubt the death toll would be massive before it could be stopped. So you have no choice but to participate, but first you have to get Biggs and Wedge some medical attention. Sid and Nero take your injured friends to the Conjurers Guild to get patched up, while you head back to Rogger's Reach to let Jessie know what happened. She's obviously worried, but she calms down a bit when Sid shows up and lets her know that they'll live. It'll be a while before the Conjurers let them go, but they'll be okay. Sid blames himself for ever activating Omega, but he didn't exactly have a choice since you all needed something to fight Shinryu. But with Omega threatening to kill everyone, it's not like the situation is any better. Nero actually fusses at Sid for blaming himself like he's some type of hero who has to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. He's a scientist, not a fighter, and protecting people is someone else's job. He's the person who makes the discoveries that makes the lives of the people heroes protect better. But ever since his dad caused the destruction of Bajra, he started trying to be more conservative, which limited his creative juices. Nero wants him to knock it off, because when he's not doubting himself, Sid tends to do the impossible, which is a serious compliment coming from Nero. Whether Nero's pep talk worked or not remains to be seen. Regardless, since the stasis field can't be reactivated, you have to go through Omega's trials. And that means you could be fighting anything Omega comes up with. So all that's left is to wait for the all-powerful Murderbot to summon you. Before they were attacked, Biggs and Wedge had found a tombstone, so Sid's gonna use this little bit of downtime to see what information it has on it, just in case it might help you with the next thing Omega throws at you. It doesn't take long for the Ironworks to detect the surge of energy from the yawn, which means Omega is probably getting ready for the next test. Despite the impending doom that will come if you were to fail one of these tests, Nero seems to be excited about all of this. But since you don't have a choice but to participate, you may as well have fun. Which means it's time to head back to the yawn. But before you leave, Jesse gives Alpha his very own Garland Ironworks uniform, which Jesse made primarily to advertise some of their merchandise. With that out of the way, it's back to the yawn you go, and once again Midgard-Sormer comes with you. When you step back into the rift, it's pretty clear that some things have changed. Some of the floating eggs are missing. That's because while you were away, Omega kept his experiments going, and half of his test subjects were wiped out, all in the fashion he had predicted. All of them except for yours. To remind you of what he will do if you fail, Omega shows you the images of Biggs and Wedge lying on the floor half dead after his attack. Midgard-Sormer asks his old enemy what has it actually accomplished since the end of their war, other than simply still being alive. The robot can't even remember where his home planet is, but that doesn't take away from his objective to fight and evolve, and that means he needs to see what you're capable of. So once again, Alpha Group has to fight their way through to Omega's next testing site, and Alpha plans on helping you this time. Of course, this test is far more difficult than the first one, but Alpha proves to be more useful than you expected, and Nero has upgraded his Garlean armor. He summons the armor like Iron Man, and his weapon is Mjolnir, so he's literally an Avenger who helps you take down Omega's version of Emperor Zand. Nero's armor was cool, but Sid's more curious about the cool magic that Alpha used. While it looks cute, Alpha was made for combat, so the little chocobo can fight. After seeing what you can do, Omega labels you as inferior test subjects, and he even sees Midgard-Sormer as weak, but since the dragon is far weaker than he was in life, that makes sense. He had given his life to Heidelin when he had brought his children to a world, so she could summon him whenever he was needed. Omega had chased Midgard-Sormer when he had fled the Dragon Star, but when he had made it to your world, he couldn't find the dragon, so it had started working on repairing itself while it looked for something else to fight. That still doesn't tell Omega why the dragon is helping the mortals. Omega and his people caused the destruction of Midgard-Sormer's home, which makes the dragon hate to even look at the robot, so he helps you so that you can destroy Omega. That thought is illogical because even Midgard-Sormer in his prime couldn't beat the robot, so helping something as weak as you doesn't make sense. But that doesn't matter. It's time for you to enter the Sigmascape and continue the test. In the Deltascape, the image that was floating on the giant egg was a castle. This time the image is a mask. Sid and Nero have no idea what it is, but it's very creepy. Since they don't have anything to go off of, they can't figure out what you're going to face, so you'll have to go in your first challenge blind. That challenge is against the Phantom Train. This fight should bring back a lot of memories for those of you who played Final Fantasy VI, but unfortunately you can't suplex the train. You do stop it nonetheless. That fight was extremely strange, but it gave Sid the data he needed to figure out the Sigmascape. Apparently it is the recreation of a devastated world that has some places with names similar to the ones in your world like Doma, but their histories are different. As for your next opponent, it is Chartanuk, which is a demon that possessed a painting. Nero has actually built something to help you change things around you by painting to help you counter the powers of the demon. And as payment for his efforts, he wants some tea, but the teapot was empty, which makes him insult Sid's parentage. Since the two are arguing over the tea, Alpha decides to set one of his cards with a picture of spring water on it beside the teapot before you dive back into the Sigmascape to fight the demon of the painting. The fight was intense, and without Nero's little toy, you wouldn't have won, but you had it, so you won. Of course, the magic brush was only meant to work there, and if you try to use it anywhere else, it won't do anything. After the battle, Sid gets a call that Biggs and Wedge have recovered, and they're heading to the Yawn to see you guys. Nero, of course, stays in the rift to try and learn more while you, Sid, and Alpha go to check on your friends. The two of them weren't exactly supposed to be up and out, but they didn't want to lay around while you fought. But you're all making things work without them, although the little jobs like keeping the teapot full have been getting neglected. The two agree to go rest, but they want you all to call them if something goes wrong. While you're talking to your friends, Nero learns that the next challenger isn't all that special, but your fourth opponent may be a problem because he seems to be nothing but total chaos. While he's working, he takes a sip of his tea, which was apparently made with salt water, which makes Nero think that studying Alpha's cards might be a good idea. The whole time he's working, Omega is watching, and he decides that your group is getting too comfortable, so he attacks Nero. Whatever Omega didn't kill Nero, but he doesn't look well when you guys return. Instead of telling you about the attack, he blames it on the salt water in the teapot. He knows Sid didn't do it because he didn't fill the teapot at all. Instead, the water came from the card Alpha used by the pot. Nero leaves Sid to help you deal with the third challenge while he gets ready for number 4. The third one is against someone called Guardian, and it should be a straightforward fight. The machine is designed to switch through a bunch of different fighting styles, but compared to what you fought before, it's nothing special and you take it down a lot easier than some of the others. The things that you fought in Sigmascape show that whatever world Omega copied was very advanced in both magic and technology. Sid wishes they could have learned from them, but it's time for the last fight in this world. It's against someone that every Final Fantasy VI player will know very well, Kefka. Sephiroth may be the most famous Final Fantasy villain, but he failed at destroying the world. Kefka succeeded and obtained godlike power, and that's what you're going up against. And Kefka is insane, so figuring out his techniques won't be easy, so Nero tweaked the monitor so he can watch the fight more closely, that way he can help you. Kefka is just as crazy as he was in his own world, and he's just as powerful, but he lost to Terra and her crew in Final Fantasy VI, and he loses to you, which concludes your test in Sigmascape. With the fighting done, Nero finally collapses, which forces him to admit that Omega had attacked him. But he doesn't regret staying behind alone, because regardless he can safely say that the only reason you survived the Sigmascape is because of him and his inventions. But he knows he won't be able to help with the next round, so Sid's gonna have to step it up, both to beat Omega and to fulfill his goal of freedom through technology. Omega congratulates you on your victory, once again overcoming your limits and beating enemies who were stronger than you. He thinks he's figured out how you do what you do. During regular activities, you subconsciously limit your strength, but when you fight, your power increases by an unpredictable amount, which means he needs to put you in serious danger to see what your true power is, and he decides to do it right now. Omega seals the Warrior of Light in a prison, and in 3 minutes he's going to kill you, so you'd better do everything you can to escape. Alpha tries to break you free, but he's far too weak. So Midgard Sormer draws on all of the power he has left to shatter your prison, but using that much power forces him to hibernate until his strength comes back. Before he fades away, he tells Omega that trying to force you to use a power he doesn't understand is stupid. If he wants to see your true power, he needs to finish his experiments, not try to skip steps. He fades away and Omega decides to listen to his words and let you recover before the next test. Before he changes his mind, you, Sid, and Alpha take Nero back to Raga's Reach to give you a report to Jesse and to get Nero some medical attention. He's not doing well. He was hurt pretty badly by Omega's creation, and it was a miracle he stayed on his feet for as long as he did. But it goes without saying that he won't be able to join you when Omega summons you again, meaning your crew has gotten even smaller as you get ready to step into the final leg of Omega's test. Back in Raga's Reach, the Warrior of Light shows up just in time for Jesse to tell her that another anomaly was detected at the Yawn, which means that Omega is ready for you again. That also means you don't have all that long to wait before Omega decides to attack the world. Sid's been working hard on figuring out how to deal with the Murderbot, and since he still hasn't shown up, Jesse lets you know what he's been working on. After your last run-in with Omega, Sid had some research notes smuggled in from Garlemald. All of the papers were things left behind by Sid's father, Midas, who was basically the Empire's top engineer and the one who had built the tower meant to harness the power of Dalamud, which led to the destruction of Bastia. Sid was supposed to take his father's position as the chief engineer, but after the Bastia incident, he decided to leave Garlemald altogether. He had never liked how they operated anyway, and the Bastia incident was the last straw. But since things are getting desperate, Sid must have decided that the knowledge that had been used to make the lunar transmitter might be the only thing that can solve the Omega problem, because if Sid is willing to do one thing, it's whatever it takes to solve a problem. Sid finally shows up after Jesse tells you everything, which means it's time to head to the Yawn. Unfortunately, Biggs, Wedge, and Nero are still in no condition to help, neither is Midgard Sormer. Jesse volunteers to join you, but Sid needs her to finish the device he was working on. While she heads off to do that, you, Sid, and Alpha head to the Yawn. Sid does have a plan, but the only way to know if it'll work is to test it, so the three of you dive back into the interdimensional rift. More of Omega's test worlds are gone, meaning his experiments are nearly over. Out of the 89 groups he tested, only 4 had survived. Omega pitted them against each other, and now only 1 is left. And you will face off against that world. If you win, then you'll face Omega, so he can finally figure out how you keep beating opponents who are so much stronger than you are. That way he can add that ability to his own repertoire. This time Omega won't put you through the evaluation process since he already knows your strength level, but he does declare that Alpha's part in this is all officially over, since Omega will personally give you access to the rift. But whether he's needed for that or not, Alpha's a part of the crew, and Sid wants him with you. Omega can't understand why you would want Alpha along since he's now useless, not to mention the fact that Alpha was originally made to be bait to lure you into Omega's domain, which worked out quite well. For some reason, Sid and the Warrior of Light hadn't figured that out, but it's not Alpha's fault. The little Chocobo has no memories of anything that happened before he met you. He was the first thing Omega had made in the rift, and it was his only attempt at making something based off of an ordinary life form that had managed to beat an enemy that was nearly as strong as Omega himself. He wanted to watch Alpha to figure out how that was even possible, but despite him repeating the experiment 1,000 times, Alpha simply died, which led Omega to make his current test with you. So he erased Alpha's memories and planted the command to come back into the rift, then he sent him out into the world. Since weak creatures like to form groups to survive, he figured Alpha would gather test subjects for him. And it worked like a charm, despite the fact that Omega's ability to create things wasn't meant to be used to make life forms. The ability was meant to be used to improve Omega's weapons and armor, but nothing prevents him from using it in the way that he has. But Sid knows the dangers of using technology for things outside of its original purpose. It never turns out the way it's supposed to, which is why all of Omega's test subjects have been weaker than they should have been. His creations could never replicate the things that had motivated their original selves to achieve great or terrible things, nor could it copy the strong desires that the heroes had to use to overcome their enemies. Which is why nothing Omega makes will ever be able to beat you, at least according to Sid. That still remains to be seen, so after Sid gets the base camp ready, it's time to get ready to dive into the final test world. Omega didn't even bother trying to hide who you were fighting. Your opponent is Chaos, the main villain from Final Fantasy I, and a name I'm sure you've heard over and over in the Stranger of Paradise trailer. It makes perfect sense that Chaos was the winner of Omega's little contest, and it definitely won't be an easy fight. But before you head off to kill Chaos, Sid has to assure Alpha that regardless of what Omega said, your current situation isn't his fault. It was you all who woke Omega up in the first place, which means if it's anyone's fault, it's Sid's. The little Chocobo still feels bad, but Sid gives him the job of keeping the teapot full with his magic card, and that makes him feel better, so it's off to fight Chaos you go. Chaos isn't nearly as difficult to overpower as he should have been, proving that Sid was right to think that Omega could not create creatures nearly as powerful as they would have been in their original realities. Regardless, you've won, completing Omega's experiment and proving yourself to be the superior warrior. But the robots still can't understand how you do what you do, which makes him start to believe that Sid was right about his creations being flawed. He begins to wonder if mortals simply have an ability that he can't measure, but he can't accept that and decides to examine you from a different angle. He sends you to a new place that he creates from his own memories, a place where he fought an enemy like none he'd ever faced before, one that he never got to beat. He can't recreate it exactly, but he comes close. Since he couldn't defeat this opponent, if you lose, Omega will still fight you. If you survive, that is. which is unlikely since you're about to face off against Omega's version of Midgard-Sormr himself, one that is nearly as strong as he had been on the Dragon Star. Omega wants you to fight the dragon right away, but since you just had a fight with Chaos and aren't at full strength, Omega listens to Sid and allows you to head back to your base camp to rest, where you find Alpha standing there with a very invisible Sid. Apparently, whatever Alpha had used to make the tea caused Sid to turn invisible. Fortunately, it turns out to be temporary. They really need to study Alpha's cards, but first you have to figure out how to fight Midgard-Sormr. With what you've learned from Omega, it's pretty clear that both the dragon and Omega come from other worlds that were at war with one another, which is what made the dragon grab his children and leave the Dragon Star with Omega chasing him. What you're up against is the younger, more savage version of the dragon that Omega remembers. Even though you've squared off against the dragon in the past, this is definitely going to be different. And since Omega created this battle on the spur of the moment, Sid can't even use the monitors to learn anything. So instead of wasting time while you fight the dragon, Sid will go to make preparations for the battle with Omega. So all you have to do is fight a version of the father of the first brood and not die. The fact that this version of Midgard-Sormr is not at his full power in this form is very good because you wouldn't have beaten him otherwise, and very bad because if at his full power he couldn't take down Omega, the Warrior of Light is probably going to die. Sid watched your battle while he worked, and he noticed that Omega's version of Midgard-Sormr looked a lot like Shinryu, which isn't all that strange since Shinryu wasn't summoned with any particular belief system to dictate how he looked. When he was summoned, he was meant to be a being as powerful as Bahamut, and apparently that made him take the form of the oldest dragon on Hydaelyn. It's not important, Sid just finds it ironic that summoning Shinryu led back to Omega, meaning you were seeing history repeat itself, at least a little bit. Regardless, you've passed the final test, so Omega shuts down all of his test worlds and transfers all of his power back into himself so he can test you properly. It seems like a battle you're destined to lose, but Sid thinks he knows Omega's weakness, and he's been working on something that should let you take advantage of it. He just needs a little more time to get ready. Always being one to use every tool at his disposal, he plans on making use of Alpha's cards too if it comes down to that. Aside from what looks like junk that the little chocobo keeps with him in places that I don't plan on trying to figure out, he has one card that looks like it either makes you bigger or smaller. Since he's not all that sure how it works, Sid thinks it'll be better to let Alpha decide when it's the best time to use it, which doesn't ease the little guy's worries at all. As a last bit of backup, Sid fills up a vial with Alpha's turn you invisible teapot water, just in case it has a purpose. With the preparations made, and a little pep talk for the chocobo that gets him fired up, you all head out of the rift to get Sid's device from Jesse. You follow Sid back to the Reach, where even though his device is ready, his hand trembles when he reaches for it because he's still traumatized by what his father had done when he used that particular bit of tech. Nero comes to talk to his old friend despite the fact that he's supposed to be in bed, and like Sid, Nero already figured out Omega's weakness. When he'd fought Shinryu, the only thing that had made it through Omega's defenses was a burst of lightning, so electricity can do some real damage. But it has to be a serious burst of electricity, like enough energy to, say, wipe out a city, which is why Sid is having an issue. When his father had made a link between the lunar transmitter and Dalamud, he came up with a method of gathering and storing massive amounts of energy, and that's what you'll need to beat Omega. Sid's improved his father's device as best he could, so it should be safe, but he can't stop thinking about the Bosnia incident every time he looks at the thing. He still sees the dead bodies and how the Empire's leaders didn't care at all. The biggest problem is that all of the death and destruction was caused by technology that was meant to help people, which is why he left and vowed only to build things that helped people. But the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and regardless of what he's wanted to do, there's always a way for things to go south, and he has to think about them and plan for them, which is the complete opposite of how he used to be. But even though he's changed, his overthinking has caused problems too. As usual, Nero solves Sid's mental dilemma with a very simple solution. Omega is all about testing people to find out what's the best way to do things. Sid can use the same method on himself. He feels that his new, more cautious way of doing things is superior to the old Sid. If that's the case, then the device he's made should be enough to stop Omega, because the old Sid would have been able to build something that could do the job. So basically, if you survive, Sid's new way is superior. If not, you all die. That should make Sid more nervous, but his hands stop shaking, so it's time to head back into the rift. Sid gives the Warrior of Light the control switch for the item he uncreatively named the Omega Jammer, so you can throw massive bursts of lightning at the robot with a little help from Sid, and you step into the arena to do battle with Omega. As expected, Omega is incredibly powerful, but with Sid's Omega Jammer, the Warrior of Light manages to beat the robot. Omega analyzes your fighting style and the sporadic, unpredictable way you fight, along with the random bursts of strength at critical moments, which reminds him of Midgard-Sormer, but the immeasurable changes seem stronger in weak creatures like yourself, which doesn't make sense to him. There has to be something special about you, and Omega's programming demands that he adds the ability to himself, which means he needs to approach the problem from a different angle. He needs to change his own physical structure, and he'll need to collapse the rift to do it. Unfortunately for you and Sid, there's nothing but the void outside of the rift. If it collapses, the two of you will die, which is Omega's plan. He can't have you alive to attack him while he remodels his body. You were good test subjects, but you're replaceable. He'll just send Alpha out to find new ones once he's done changing. Omega and the rift vanish, leaving you, Alpha, and Sid alone in the void. Alpha, being one of Omega's creations, is built to be able to find his creator, so he races to where the robot is. Omega believes that you and Sid died when the rift collapsed, but using a combination of Alpha's invisibility T and his shrinking card, the two of you shrank down and rode the little chocobo back to Omega. Alpha, the thing that Omega thought was useless, is the only reason you're still alive. The fact that Alpha went to such lengths to save you is something Omega can't understand, but having you there allows him to finish his tests. He completes his transformation and emerges in his new body, a very human-looking body. Apparently he decided that your form was superior, so he decided to use it for himself to learn its secrets, and the fight won't end until he does. Omega spends the fight learning his new body, including switching genders to see how differently each body moves. When you push each body to the limit, Omega decides that fighting you as a team might be more effective. Even fighting you as a group, Omega couldn't beat you, and even in defeat, he still can't understand how you do what you do. He can't understand Alpha either. Somehow, without fighting you, the little chocobo has become like you, gaining the ability to overcome great obstacles that should be too much for him. The thing that Omega can't understand is the human soul. It's something that no amount of fighting could teach. It was something that he could have learned if he had worked with you like Alpha did. Omega finally begins to understand the source of your power, and he wonders if he had it, would he be able to make it back home? But that's the opposite of how the human spirit and will works. If he could truly understand what it meant to be human, he would know that trying to take a journey that long would break the strongest will. Staring up towards his home, Omega finally understands and dies, which leads to the next problem. The rift starts to collapse. Fortunately for you, Biggs and Wedge come riding in on the back of Racevelger, sent of course by Midgard-Sormer to save the day. For his entire life, Midgard-Sormer had never asked Racevelger for anything, so he likely sent him to make up for the fact that he had led Omega to your world in the first place. Unfortunately, there's no telling how long it will take for the dragon to recover, but he's still watching the world while he sleeps. He had formed a bond with his new home, and he will continue to look after it. That help allowed you to survive your victory over Omega, something Sid is not going to complain about. With that situation resolved, you all head back to Rogger's Reach, while Biggs tells you how the two of them had come to the yawn to help when they saw the ether in the pit bubbling like crazy. They were gonna jump in, which would have definitely killed them when Racevelger showed up and offered to give them a ride, and the rest is history. Back at the Reach, after hearing about what you did, Jesse figures that what they will do if another Omega shows up is just build another U to send after it. But that's a problem for another day. For now, the other Alliance leaders are eager to hear what happened with Omega. Sid plans on telling them everything, although it's doubtful they'll believe the story. What the Warrior of Light needs is rest, and as for Alpha, after taking him for a walk around Rogger's Reach, the little chocobo decides to go on an adventure of his own to see the world with his own eyes. And after a tearful goodbye, the little chocobo heads off to see the world with a little Omega model that Biggs and Wedge had built that may have more of the real Omega in it than they think. In Old Charlian, the Warrior of Light runs into one of the technicians who had worked on the ship Ragnarok, and since you've made it back from Ultima Thule, they've been going through the ship's flight logs. Your journey left them a lot of records about places and events that they had never dreamed of, but one of the transmissions they had pulled from the logs had been intercepted while you were in flight. They think it's an audio message, but none of their people have been able to decipher the language. They had almost given up, but they think they figured out the way to crack it, and it's only fair that you be there to hear it. As it turns out, the reason the Charlians have a chance of decrypting the message is because they called on the Ironworks for help. Biggs is the first one to show up, and he's surprised, but not really, to see that you're once again in the middle of something interesting. The message is alien, probably from a very far away star, and aside from the moon bunnies, the Charlians don't have many space allies to ask for help. So they called on the Ironworks, and the first thing Wedge thought was that it would be a good idea to see if Omega could figure out the message. Not the big Omega that tried to kill you all, but the little model that they made. It was supposed to just be a simple device that would follow a target, but Biggs had seen it acting odd on more than one occasion, and after hearing the reports that came back about the Omicron and how they could store their minds as data outside of their bodies, Biggs started to think that Omega may have put his mind into their model right before you finished it off. So teaming up with the Charlians, Biggs and Wedge added a voice box to the toy. When Wedge and Alpha show up with the Omega minion, the Warrior of Light asks him if he's in fact the same Omega that you fought. Turns out that it is one and the same, but Omega admits that he's no longer a threat in this new form. According to his calculations, he's about as strong as a baby, and the machinery that let him switch bodies died with his older body, so he's stuck where he is. If the model breaks, then Omega will die, permanently. In short, Omega is no longer a threat. Before he'd switch bodies, he'd re-examined his directive and decided that even though his form had changed, the mission of evolving hadn't. So he still wants to figure out what makes you and others like you so strong. And since Omega recognized the language in the message as Pan-Galactic Basic, he uses a different tactic to get what he wants. One that's almost as effective as brute force: blackmail. Since Sid apparently uses the floor as a storage space for notes, Omega read a report on the final days, and he learned that his planet of Alphatron was destroyed after Meteon got there. After reading the report, he also got a decent understanding of Dynamis. What he doesn't understand is why the Omicrons weren't immune to it, since they shouldn't have been driven by emotion, yet their leader still had the desire to end it all after dealing with Meteon. So Omega wants to study all the factors of the final days to get a better understanding of the heart and the intangible and oftentimes illogical emotions that come with it. And for that, having the help of an illogical being like the Warrior of Light would be perfect. And it's not like you have a choice if you want Omega to decipher the message. Alpha will probably tag along, but the little chocobo fell asleep during Omega's long and boring conversation. Instead of just going over Sid's notes with the robot, Wedge thinks it'll be a more enjoyable experience to go and do the research on the final days in the field. That way you can find Omega's answers and keep Alpha awake. Maybe. Omega is okay with that, and there are 3 specific things that he wants to study. The first is how the final days cut through Razat Han. He couldn't really find any pattern in the people who transformed. It all seemed random, so he wants to visit the place. It's a long way from Old Charlian, but fortunately, since Omega and Alpha are both practically toys, Omega points out that if you just put them in your pocket, you can teleport with them to the Aetheryte crystals, which will make the trip a lot faster. It works, so you, Alpha, and Omega head around the city talking to people to try and figure out how they avoided transforming into blasphemies. After talking to the people in the city, Omega tries to come up with answers on how they avoided transforming, but all of the people's reasons are so different that they do nothing to tell him where the source of their strength came from. He decides to try to talk to someone who lived a similar life to someone who did turn, but managed to avoid it. He decides on a merchant similar to Kazal, so you take him to talk to a man named Jinabaha. The only thing that Jinabaha thinks that may have helped him survive was the fact that he was more focused on protecting the workshop than being afraid. But then again, fear over not being able to fulfill his duty to his people may have been what caused Kazal to transform. Which again, doesn't help Omega much, but Jinabaha knows a guy named Nashvan who might benefit from talking to you. So your very odd group heads out to find him. The man's extremely excited to see you or any member of the Scions who had helped him and a lot of other people escape on the day when people had started to turn. He lost his son that day and he likely would have turned himself had it not been for the Scions. Even afterwards, he had lost the will to do anything, but Jinabaha kept giving him random jobs to do until he was able to pull himself together again. Omega can't understand how giving someone who's lost the will to do stuff to do, actually helps, since every instinct in the man's body was telling him to just lie down and die. It doesn't help all that much when Nashvan tells him that the thing that made him want to give up is now the thing that makes him want to keep going. The concept is so hard to grasp that Omega starts to wonder if he just doesn't have the ability to understand human emotions. The fact that humans don't even understand why we do some of the things we do should have clued him in. Because you can put multiple people in the same situations, give them the same upbringing and resources, and they all still might make completely different decisions. Omega decides that it'll be for the best to just accept the fact that people are random and move on to the next part of his study. And that takes place in Garlemald. He wants to study the Ilzabar contingent and the people of Garlemald because he can't understand why the two groups didn't immediately start working together despite having a mutual enemy in the Telophoroi. While that is something that a logic-based machine wouldn't be able to understand, Omega should have thought about how the cold would affect his new form. For the moment, he hasn't frozen to death, so he wants to get started with talking to people. For the most part, the locals have started to get a bit more friendly with the outsiders now that Julius and his Imperial soldiers have started to help out. There's still people who think it's a trick and the foreigners are using their odd magic to enslave people's minds. Granted, anima was used to do that, but it wasn't done by the outsiders. Still, it's progress, although Omega points out that talking to the Garleans isn't the best way to take over their nation. That's also not the goal, which has the Omicron wondering why the outsiders are even in Garlemald. The fact that some of the Garleans are willing to starve to death rather than accept help from people they don't like is stupid to Omega, because it is. And the fact that the Ilzabar contingent is trying to help the Garleans despite them not wanting it is also stupid to Omega, because it is. The people are all irrational, and Omega thinks that all Omicrons would have come to the same conclusion, which still doesn't tell him anything about how mortals' hearts and minds work. He's only learned that mortals are good at complicating simple stuff. It's a terrible trait, one that you saw lead two sisters to run away from you and die when you and the others first reached Garlemald. Omega saw similar self-destructive behavior when his people were conquering planets, so he thinks seeing the graves might help him understand the why behind those actions. You're not the first ones to arrive at the graves. A soldier from the 1st Legion named Aeneas is there. He's one of Julius's men who you met before, and a prime target for Omega's questioning. What the man thinks is a weird Magitech communicator wants to know why he's there, and he doesn't really have a reason. Alphino and Alice told him the story of what happened to the sisters, so he came to visit their graves to pay his respects. The twins still feel bad about the deaths, but the Garleans don't blame them. Especially not since they were tricked into starting a civil war and killing a lot of their own people anyway. It's kind of hard to judge other people's mistakes when you're busy trying to take accountability for your own. Omega doesn't see the two things as similar at all, and from a logical standpoint, he's right. If you steal a car and your neighbor steals your TV, the fact that you're a thief too doesn't change the fact that your neighbor still owes you a new television. But from a moral standpoint, you're both pieces of crap. Omega doesn't think morals have anything to do with why the Garleans aren't attacking the Ilzabar contingent. It's either because they don't have an army large enough to win if they do try to fight, or their emotions are interfering with their logic. He wants Aeneas to tell him which one it is. It's true that the Garleans are militarily outmatched, but that's not why they aren't fighting. Surviving is more important than holding a grudge. In other words, revenge is important, but not as important as food. But the people are of two minds about everything, even the way Lord Quintus decided to opt out instead of being captured. Some think he abandoned them to the enemy, while others think that he freed them so they could make their own choices. What they believe doesn't really matter, because in the end they still have to move forward. So it's better to save your energy for what's important, and if that means working with the contingent, he's fine with that. Plus he likes the twins, which is natural. The twins are hard not to like, at least once you get past A Realm Reborn. Alphino sucked in A Realm Reborn. Omega actually understands Aeneas a bit, and he's starting to realize that he may have been working the heart problem from the wrong angle. It wasn't the mortals who control their thoughts and emotions for power. Their emotions are so out of control that they basically use your body as a puppet and drive you around. That's also why studying mortals hasn't done anything but confuse him. So for his third field of study, he wants to examine something more in tune with the ancients than mortals. And for that, he wants to see the Loporrits, also known as the Moon Bunnies, so it's time for a trip to the moon. A study of the ancient machines on the moon base could help him get a feel for the ancients and their civilization, but he doesn't have the tools to get into the computers with this new body, so he needs a bit of help. Growing just so happens to see the three of you, and he runs up to say hi, but when he sees Alpha and all of the Chocobo's fluffiness, he gets depressed by the fact that the Loporrits have officially been out-fluffed. But when he hears that you want to study their inventions, that means you haven't replaced them with a much fluffier creature. So he's more than happy to take Omega around to see whatever he wants while you wait. Alpha and Omega come back without the bunny because after Omega's 50th question, the Moon Bunny had stopped paying attention. Omega had seen enough to figure out the rest on his own, so he let the Loporrit go. From what he learned, he labels the ancients as a level 4 civilization, which means two very important things. The first is that there's a system for ranking different civilizations in the universe, and the second is the fact that Omega casually labeled the ancients as a level 4 civilization means their ranking isn't all that special, and there are other planets out there with creatures of the same power and intellect as unsundered Ascians. Regardless, their status didn't rid them of their flaws that caused them to be self-destructive, but studying them should tell Omega more about why his own leader went the same route as so many other worlds. Which means he wants to talk to the Watcher, but instead of teleporting, he wants to ride Argus. Vanna's dog refuses to let them ride it, and Omega assumes that it has something to do with Growing Way's fluffy level. Because the Moon Rabbit is an idiot, the genius robot Omega thinks that there's a fluff-based hierarchy where the fluffiest creature rules. Argus clearly thinks you're all stupid, but he gives you a ride to the Watcher, who is happy to have so many visitors. But it turns out that the person best suited to answer Omega's questions about the ancients is you, since you spent so much time with them on Elpis. It turns out that the person who the Watcher was modeled after was a scholar at the Uniter during the time that you went to the past, and he was a close friend of Vanna. He remembers joining her group during the final days, but he can't remember much about the event, which was likely something that Vanna did on purpose so he couldn't influence the newly created people of the Sundered World. But he still remembers how sad he felt when Vanna became Hydaelyn's heart, because she'd never be able to live among the people she cared about again. But her friend wouldn't abandon her even then, and she must have hurt him, which is why she restored him in some way as the Watcher, similar to how Emmett Selk recreated Hythodeus. And all of her plans were successful because of you. After hearing the story of your time on Elpis, Omega can't understand how you look at Vanna as a hero. What she did led to the end of the final days, but she did severe damage to the world and its people in the process. And she left Emmett Selk and the other Unsundered, her friends or at least her associates, in a miserable state for thousands of years. Even Hermes needs to be mentioned, because if he hadn't tested mankind, they never would have become strong enough to do what was necessary. He's similar to the Omicrons who first started turning their bodies into machines to grow stronger. The first attempts were bad, but they led to the successful ones later on. And even though Emmett Selk tried to destroy your world to restore his, he was working towards saving his people, which makes Omega wonder, was he the hero or the villain? The true answer is they were all heroes and villains depending on where you stood, and that gray area is what has been hard for Omega to understand, but he's starting to get it, slowly. No two people are the same. There's no way to determine what choices people will make, even if they're put in the same situation, so no amount of studying will allow anyone to accurately map human emotions. But it's not the same for the Omicrons. They all follow the same logic pathways, and should all come to the same conclusions no matter the situation. At least that's what it's supposed to be. Yet Omega still doesn't know what led their leader to the final decision that destroyed their world. So he's going to continue putting all the data together and try to figure it out from there. But for now, this little trip is over, so it's back to Labyrinthos you all go. You all make it back at the perfect time as usual. Something's come up and Biggs and Wedge have to go help Jesse with a job that got messed up. Their airship's already arrived, so they want to talk to Omega on the way. Since you helped him out with his investigation, Omega's come to a conclusion. He labels your heart and emotions as a phenomenon, one that influences the individual's perception of reality, which is actually a very good definition. Since you helped out, he's willing to translate the message, but even more important than that, he's come to the conclusion that the Omicron's leader didn't make a logical decision after meeting Medion. He acted off of his feelings and decided that it was for the best if all Omicrons stopped functioning, which means whether they become machines or not, deep down the Omicron can feel things too. As for the message, it's nothing special. It simply says in so many words to keep pushing forward and hopefully all of your days are happy ones. Simple or not, it makes you all smile. The fact that he still can't understand why something so small had such a massive effect on your emotional state, Omega's determined to continue his search until he figures that out, and why his leader decided that the Omicrons would have been better off dead. Meaning that his journey with Alpha is far from over. Now that you've made it back from Osdal's legacy, the Warrior of Light heads to Charlian to find out what it was that Kral wanted you to do. Since he's made it back from your dungeon trip, Grahatias finished all the paperwork that he had to do, so he's ready to help you with Kral's mission, and the Catboy is excited to do more field work with you. To give you the full scope of things, Kral starts by refreshing your memory about who the students of Baldessian are. The group was founded by Kral's grandfather Golov to uncover the mysteries of Hydaelyn and study her gift. They've pretty much completed that mission, but there's still other work to do, like coming up with ways to counter threats like the Warring Triad. Crow thinks the best way to carry out that mission is to keep exploring the unknown. Because of that motto, a new request that she received for help caught her attention. It was sent by your old friend Rambrose of the Sons of St. Coinoc, who you explored the Crystal Tower with. Something has happened in Mordona, something that is outside of his realm of expertise, so he wants help from the students of Baldessian. Crow has to handle things in Charlian, so the Warrior of Light and Graha Tia head to Revenant's Toll. After the usual greeting between friends is done, Rambrose lets you know why he called you. Not too long ago, an explorer came to the Sons of St. Coinoc and said that he discovered the Phantom Realm. Since unlike your two friends, you spend more time hitting people with books than actually reading them, the Warrior of Light has no idea what the Phantom Realm is. Fortunately, your smarter friends are more than willing to explain it to you. Legends say that all across Eorzea, a place exists that appears at random. It can be seen from a distance, but it disappears whenever you get close. It's been mentioned in stories for generations, but no one has ever been able to prove that it existed. Every time explorers decide to write it off as fake, somebody else shows up claiming that they saw it, which keeps the search going. The fact that Rambrose actually called on the students of Baldessian means that the search is over. The place has really been found, and you'll get to see it for yourself. The man who found it is named Derek. He was supposed to come with Rambrose to meet you, but he's not all that big of a fan of people, so he preferred to stay out by Silvertear Lake, which means you have to track him down. Because the Warrior of Light still has brain damage from all the time she's been hit in the head, she finds a baby Opu Opu and stares at it thinking that it's Derek, like Rambrose wouldn't have told you if the person you were looking for was a big-eyed baby koala bear rat. Granted, the thing does belong to Derek, and it is different from normal animals, so it's likely on the verge of becoming an auspice or something else. Derek found him on one of his journeys. He was hurt, and after the man fixed him up, the creature started following him around. Because everyone knows who you are, Derek is happy to have the savior of the world help him. But before you and Graha can agree to take the job, you need to know what it is, and for that, you need to see the Phantom Realm. Derek has no problem taking you to the place, and you never would have found the entrance on your own because apparently when the place appeared, it made a spot on Silvertear Lake that you could walk across. It's a much more stable water walking spell than the one Urianger made, and after you walk between two giant rocks, you and Graha are teleported to a place that makes me think of Mount Olympus or Asgard. Since he had found the place, Derek named it Omphalos, and whatever people who saw it from a distance described it as, it definitely is not a mirage. The name means navel in an ancient language, and Derek called it that since the place is located in Mordona, which is at the center of Aldenard. There are no people in the area, but somebody's been cutting the grass and pressure washing the buildings, so somebody has been coming and going. Derek wants you to find out who made the place and why. Graha wants to know why it decided to appear now all of a sudden. Did someone reveal it on purpose, or did it simply show up because of the final days? You can see the Crystal Tower in the distance, meaning you are on an island very high above Silvertear Lake, but you couldn't see the place from outside. The spot you stepped through had to be some type of portal, but with the Battle of Silvertear Skies that had happened over the lake, somebody should have seen the island. Since there was no mention of it, Graha believes that you may have been sent to a world that is only slightly separate from your own, a place close enough to where it can be seen as an illusion, but only accessible through specific locations. As for the structures, the designs on them are the marks of the 12, the gods of Eorzea. It looks like it was built for worship, but Graha can't think of anyone who could have built it and hid it with magic after the Battle of Silvertear Skies without someone noticing. It is definitely a mystery, one way too big for you and Graha to solve on your own. He wants to go let Crow know what you found and get the things together to pull off a full investigation. Derek is all for it, so you get ready to head back to Charlian when 2 of the buildings open and 4 people appear with the most godlike entrance you can imagine, saying that you being there is tainting their sacred realm and you will be punished for it. There are 4 of them, and the one at the front with the hammer is what it looks like when you've won the gym. He does not need to lift anything anymore. The dude has no more muscles to gain. The fact that he's Birago the Builder makes sense, because not only does he build stuff, he built his body too. That name and their entrance proves one thing, that the 12, at least 4 of them, are definitely real. And if what Birago says is true, they are not primals. They are real flesh and blood gods, and now that Hydaelyn's gone, they are the true rulers of your world. They've been watching mankind and they see you, Hydaelyn's champion, as a threat to them taking their place. So they should eliminate you, and since you're in their world, they could. But as gods, they can't just go around smiting people. Well, they could, but where's the fun in that? So instead, they decide to test you. You'll probably die from it, but they're bored anyway. Clearly, they haven't watched you and Graha closely enough, because them just showing up and threatening the two of you is a good way to get stabbed. Either that, or they're strong enough not to care. And I get the feeling it's the second one. They open the path to their sanctum, and they want you to show them what mankind is worth, and whether or not they deserve to be the master of their own fate. They want you to gather up your strongest companions and show your worth. When the four gods head back into their domain to prepare for your arrival, Derek says that during all of his trips to the place, nothing like this has ever happened before. He never saw anyone, let alone gods, and now they plan on taking over the world. The 12 have been talked about and worshipped for multiple eras, but as far as Graha knows, they have never appeared to mortals before. Their random appearance and their claims all seem a little suspicious, but you can't exactly ignore them. And regardless of what they say, they could be primals like Hydaelyn and Zodiac, but there's no way to be sure. Primal or not, if they are serious about taking over the star, this won't be a small problem, so you'll need to deal with it. Meaning the students of Baldessian will take the job. As for the sanctums of the 12, there are different places that exist past each of the gates, and Derek's explored them all. He claims that there are times where people can get into them and times where people can't, but now the gates are open so you don't have to worry about finding a way inside. He didn't see any gods while he wandered around in the place, but he knows his way around. I have a strong feeling that he's lying about something. Him and his pet monkey rat are just weird. He says he's not really a fighter, but if you can keep him safe, he'll guide you through the sanctums. Even though you're strong, Graha thinks taking Birago's advice and bringing people with you would probably be the smartest way to go because you don't know how strong these gods are. Fortunately, you know quite a lot of adventurers who can come and die with you. This time Graha won't be one of them. While he's more than useful in a fight, this time his brain will be more helpful. He's going to go to Kral and start figuring out more about the 12. So with your strange guide in tow, you head into Aglaya to face off against Birago, Rhalgr, Azima, and Nalthal. Even saying that sounds like you're making a very bad life decision. The first domain you enter is Lightning, meaning it belongs to Birago. They could have been a little less on the nose with the whole God of Thunder wielding a giant hammer thing, but we're clearly fighting Thor. Also, if you don't shrink the summoner pets, you will have a very hard time dodging attacks. The constant appearance of random primals cause so many problems in this place. After you beat Bob the Builder, you come up against your next challenge, Rhalgr the Destroyer. He summons a minion that's strong enough to let you know what's coming, then you face off against the God of Destruction himself on the palm of his statue. With the Destroyer beaten, you step into the realm of fire, the realm of Azima. After she tests you with some of her beasts, you come face to face with the Flame Dancer, and she is definitely a force to be reckoned with. Between the Firebird from Pandemonium and Azima, the third fights in these Endwalker raids are really causing me problems. After you beat the hottest member of the 12, it's time to face off against the god that's worshipped by everyone in Ul'dah, Nalthal. And I have to admit that I did not expect this fight to be so cool. I really wanted to tank it, but apparently everybody else wanted to tank too because the tank queue was long. So I had to do this fight as a red mage, and let me tell you something. If you don't know what you're doing, which I did not because it was the first time, this is a nightmare for any caster. Also, now you know why people use the phrase Thal's balls as a curse. If you manage to survive, Nalthal will find you worthy and fade away in defeat. Having beaten the 4 members of the 12, you come out of the sanctum just as Graha and Kral show back up. You let them know that you've already dealt with the 12, only for them to reappear alive and well and completely unharmed. Turns out they were as strong as they claimed to be. Luckily for you, they were only pretending to be bad guys so you and the other adventurers would fight them with all you had. Granted, Azima did get a little carried away. Even Nalthal had fun, which is apparently odd for him because he's usually uptight being a god of balance and all that. The Warrior of Light and Graha get ready to fight them, but Rhalgr tells you to relax. They aren't primals, and they don't drain the land's ether or control people's minds. The versions of them that Louis Soir had summoned during the fight with Bahamut wasn't actually them, but a primal made from the hopes and prayers of all the people of Eorzea. If they aren't primals, the question is, what are they? But it would make things far too simple if they tell you, so they won't. They do have goals of their own, which is why they pushed you into a fight with them. And they apologize for it, but it was necessary. They won't tell you what their goal is either. Part of it is making you find out what it is on your own. If you keep searching, then not only will you find out what they plan on doing, but who they are and where they came from. After you do some research, they promise to meet you again. Until then, I'm pretty sure Birago is on his way back to the gym. Kral wants you to tell her everything once she introduces herself to your client, him and his nameless Opu Opu. Once you tell her and Graha about your battles with the gods, fights that during which the Warrior of Light says she couldn't sense any murderous intent coming from any of them. My repair bill says otherwise, but we'll just go with it. Livingway had told you all that the method of summoning that the Ascians taught leaves the primals with a strong desire to convert people to their side, which is why the primals temper their worshippers. The 12 don't seem to want that at all, so if they are primals, they're very unique. Emmett Selk had mentioned the fact that you don't even know who the 12 are, meaning he knew and wanted you to figure it out, which, alongside the students of Baldessian, you will. Which makes Derek happy since it means you'll be taking his job. Kral decides to stick around the 12 Sanctum to see what she can learn, while you, Graha, and Derek head back to Eorzea to see what you can learn about the 12. For some reason, Derek tells the very aware Opu Opu to stay with Kral because he doesn't think it's right to leave her there alone. There's definitely more to the thing than what we know, but for now, there are far more important things to worry about. The 12 were already being worshipped way back during the 3rd Astral Era, when the Allagan Empire was at its peak. By the 5th Astral Era, the nations that fought in the War of the Magi each had one of the 12 as their guardian deity. The way their worship changes over time, but they all worship from Ishgard to Sharlayan. Graha thinks that visiting different places in Eorzea and learning how the 12 are worshipped, he can figure out the differences between the gods of legend and the people that you met. It's a good plan, and the first stop is Rogger's Reach, where they worship, you guessed it, Rogger. You've been to the Reach countless times, but it's the first time Graha's been there with you, and he's obviously excited about it. Derek finds the fact that Graha likes traveling with people to be odd, since he prefers to travel alone. He's been to the Reach before when he was hunting for the Phantom Realm, and he realized that most of the appearances of the realm happened in places where the worship of the 12 was at its highest, which means you're on the right track. Rogger's Reach is the home of the Temple of the Fist, which was the headquarters for the Fist of Rogger. It was burned down by the Mad King Theodoric, so most of the books that were stored there were lost, but the people who still live in the area should know something about the local religious practice. So the three of you split up to check around. The Warrior of Light runs into Marjorie, the woman who you guided through the Temple of the Fist. She's still obsessed with all things monk, and when you tell her that you're looking for information on Rogger, she gives you a book called Destructivity, and it has a lot of information on Rogger worship. It's one of the few books that actually survived the destruction of the temple, saved by the monk Wiedergeld. Marjorie hopes the book helps, but she has her own stuff to do, so she rushes off to likely get herself and her bodyguard killed while you go to meet up with Graha and Derek. You give Graha the book and he skims through it, coming across some pages talking about the creation of that giant Rogger statue. When the floods of the 6th Umbral Calamity were drowning the people of Eorzea, the ancient people of Alamigo were guided to safety by a comet. They believed Rogger had sent the comet, which made them have even more faith in him. Some of the people claimed they actually saw the god, and the stories were passed down to people who eventually built a statue that looked like the being the people claimed they saw. And the statue does look like the Rogger you fought. If he were a primal, that would make sense, since the beings that are summoned have an appearance made from what the summoners believe the primal looks like. But since people saw Rogger first, then made the statue, there was no way they could have all had the image in their minds to use to summon the god. See, this is the problem with starting with what you believe is an answer to a question and then searching for evidence to prove your answer. Because Graha doesn't know what else the 12 could actually be, he's still assuming that they're primals, and he's trying to work backwards from there. Meaning he'll never figure out what they really are. Apparently Rogger's gotten sick of you saying the same thing over and over after he's already told you that they aren't primals, because he and Birago appeared to the three of you in the form of a bird and a spriggan to once again tell you that they're not summoned beings. Their domains are scattered all over Eorzea, and one of them isn't far from where you currently are, so it's not unusual for people to catch sights of them sometimes. They have laws that keep them from stepping into your world in their true forms, so they turn into regular creatures when they want to watch you. They should make it to where when you're fighting regular creatures, one could actually be a god that when you hit it, it does something bad to you, like turns you into a Lalafell for a day or something. The gods keep their sanctums hidden too,
but when the ether of the land becomes unstable, sometimes they can be seen by mortals with special abilities like the Echo. Calamities are times where the ether of the entire world is disrupted, so there have been multiple times where people would have caught glimpses into the sanctums of the gods. The two gods have said all they can without giving away too much, so once again they leave you, but at least now you can be absolutely sure that they are not primals. One thing Graha did learn from his studies is that Rhaegar and Ramu are similar, which means the Sylphs probably used the actual Rhaegar's appearance as a template to summon their primal. And if that's how faith in Ramu came about, it's possible that all the different religions of the world came from people seeing the 12 at one point or another. That still doesn't tell when the 12 were first seen or where they came from. Graha gets a call from Krall saying that she's recruited someone to help with the investigation. This woman is an expert on mythology, and Graha has to get her from the sunken temple of Karn after he makes a pit stop somewhere. So he sends you and Derek to Ul'dah since Thanalan is full of Nalthal worship. Instead of traveling together, the two of you head there separately because Derek really isn't a fan of people. The two of you meet up at the Arsyneth Ossuary, which is a temple devoted to the worship of Thal, who was thought to be the twin brother of Nald, and the keeper of the realm of the dead, and the one who measures the worth of people's souls. Nald watches over the living and their economic success, which is why he's heavily worshipped in Ul'dah since they love money and he's the god of money. At one point in time, Nalthal was thought of as one god, but he eventually got labeled as two, but what you saw was one person with two different personalities. Derek is really bad with people because in a temple set to worship a god, he says out loud that you saw that god. Naturally, that draws people's attention, so the two of you leave before people start to ask questions or try to stone you for blasphemy. But you saw what you needed to. While the Nalthal that the people worship seems slightly different from the one you met, the similarities are enough to say that someone probably saw the god just like Rhaegar. Derek isn't all that fond of just hanging out with you, so he figures you can head to the sunken temple of Karn and find Graha Tia and his new companion. You and Derek beat Graha there by a few minutes and find a scholar laying out on the ground asking for food. Graha shows up and gives the woman who he calls Snoogheim some Archon loaf and coffee, and she pops to her feet as good as new. She's surprised to see Graha because she had never told him that she was going to be out by the sunken temple researching the worship of Azima. She had already forgotten that the students of Baldessian wanted her to help with the study of the 12 since she's an expert in mythology who has worked with the students before. Granted, sometimes she forgets to eat while she works, which is why you found her laying on the ground. When you tell her about the Phantom Realm and the domains of the 12, she says they are the heavens of lightning and fire from the legends. Along with believing in the 12, ancient people believed in 7 heavens and 7 hells. It's been proven that when people die, they go to the ethereal sea, not the heavens or hells, but based off of what you saw, there's more to those domains too. And Snoogheim can't wait to see it all, so you all head to Omphalos. When you arrive, Snoogheim sees that Omphalos matches the 7th heaven from the stories. You clue the woman in and let Krall know what happened in Rhaegar's Reach before Krall finally tells you what she's learned. The gateway at the center of the place is strange. The other 6 gates lead to each of the 6 heavens, and you're already in the 7th heaven, so where does the other gate go? My guess is the 7th hell, which would be a place opposite to the 7th heaven with gates that lead to each of the other hells. The second weird thing is the monument at the center. It has magic that Krall has never seen, but she thinks that she can figure it out with time. All in all, there are a lot of questions that need to be answered, and they won't get answered in a day, so you all leave the Phantom Realm to go and get something to eat and plan for what is bound to be a massive journey. And maybe along the way you can teach Derek some people skills. Out in Mordona, the Warrior of Light heads out to check in with Derek to see just how things are coming with the investigation into the Phantom Realm, and it turns out that he heard from Graha Tia just a little while ago. He and Krall finished all of their work in Sharlayan, and they're headed over there at that very moment to run some field tests. When they get there, Krall's her normal cheery self, while Graha's about to die because he's carrying what looks like an old school jukebox on his back. The device is an etheric analyzer, and it lets you scan and collect data on different forms of ether. It records it and stores it for later study. In other words, it's a very bulky scouter from Dragon Ball Z that can read power levels. Since the Phantom Realm is hidden by illusions, studying the place is hard, so Graha figured that using the right equipment would make things go more smoothly.
The equipment's hard to carry, but that's probably because they forgot that chocobo exists, and so do carts and airships, and all other types of more efficient ways of shuttling things around. He could have just put it in a wheelbarrow, and that would have made more sense than using himself as a pack horse. Either way, the device is not his. The forum lent it to them, as well as all of the money they needed to fund their trip, meaning Graha could have definitely afforded to rent a wagon to carry the thing. They need to return it in the same shape that they got it in, especially since they don't usually lend things out. The students of Baldessian are highly respected, as are the Scions of the Seven Dawn, so the forum made an exception for them. Krau still wants to rebuild the students so they won't need to rely on outside help, and she thinks succeeding at finding out about the Phantom Realm and the 12 will get her organization the recognition that it needs to get back on track, which means this task has to turn out well. It's going to be hard since the 12 are confusing creatures. They're supposed to be guardian deities of Eorzea, but for some reason they want to fight mortals, and Krau has no idea why. The only way to find out is to talk to them, so you all head back to the Phantom Realm where Snogum's waiting for you. She's happy to see you all, and the etheric analyzer, and she's even more excited to tell you about what she's found out about the monument in the center of the Phantom Realm. She's found out that she has no idea what the monument says. In other words, she's found out nothing according to Derek, but she says that finding out what you don't know is an important part of research, because once you know what you don't know, you can start trying to figure it out. The language written on the monument has been seen in other places before, so it can be translated, but bits of information are missing. So once it's complete, then she can get started on finding out what it says. She has a pretty simple plan for that. You're all in the realm of the gods, and they seem to like to talk to mortals, so you could simply ask them. Of course, they also want to fight, so if you offer to give them what they want, they'll probably give you what you want. All you have to do is call them and they should show up. Snogum has an idea on how to do that, and she leads you all to the gate of the Heaven of Earth. The Heaven of Earth is said to be Nafika's realm, and there's a saying passed down in Gridania that she thinks will get the goddess's attention since the city does worship her. So even though it seems stupid, your entire group screams out Montoy, and it actually works. The gate opens and Nafika shows up. She's very well designed, let's just say that. And Snogum goes full fangirl over her since she looks exactly like she did in all of the drawings from the legends. And the goddess did actually want to talk to you all. She knows that you're trying to figure out what the monument says, and if you fight her and a few more of her friends, they'll give you the key to do it. That sounds nice, but Graha remembers how uncooperative the other gods had been, and he wants to know if she's being 100% honest. Apparently they've been watching your actions since the last little contest, and they've decided that even after you figure out what the monument's for, you'll all still be willing to help them. So it's not that big of a deal. She'll tell you more after the fight, so she leaves to get ready while you do the same. At first, Graha had planned on going back to the heavens you had visited the last time you were there, but Nafika's deal makes for much better opportunities. Derek's not going to come with you this time since you kinda know what to expect, and with his extreme lack of combat skills, he's not going to exactly be useful, so it'll be you and Graha heading in this time. He won't be able to fight with you since he'll be carrying the massive device, which means you'll have to figure things out yourself, and since there's nothing left to do, you head into the second trial of the 12, Euphrosyne. The first person you run into is Nafika, and she immediately shows you that some of the most dangerous people in the world are landscapers. She takes her scythe and proceeds to beat you to death with flowers because nature can be rough. Once you've finally beaten her, she sends you on to the next challenge, which turns out to be Althic. At first he was going to fight you alone, but his sister Namia decides to join the party because what better way to make your life more difficult than to have you go up against two gods at once. One is controlling space and time, while the other one shows you that astrologians are actually meant to be a DPS job. Once you've dealt with that nightmare, you move on to face the most violent goddess of them all, Alone. Fire and ice bosses are always rough, but this woman is kind of insane. She's a paladin with a spear, and when I say she knows how to fight, if Xenos wanted a challenge, he should have started something with her. She is the best, most brutal fight I've seen in a 24-man, and I loved it. When she falls, you move on to the final challenge, Menfina. She tries to kill you on her own, but when you prove that you won't die that easily, she brings in her wolf and steps things up to 1,000. And despite being strong, she doesn't hold a candle to Alone. With the last challenge completed, the Warrior of Light finally heads back outside. Krau and the others are happy to see that you didn't die, But Snogum is more excited to see what data Graha collected in the device. The drive holding the data is really fragile, so she has to be very careful while taking it out. So of course Minfina appears at the perfect time to try to make her drop it, and she winks at her because she clearly did it on purpose. Fortunately, Snogum didn't ruin the data when she jumped, and of course Minfina didn't appear alone. Nafika and the others are there too. They all want to talk to your group because they seem to really like mortals, probably because they don't hang around them enough to know that they suck, and they're true to their word. They agree to give you what you need to read the monument, but to do that they need you to picture in your mind something that's used to hold knowledge, and they'll manifest it for you. That sounds exactly like what Emmett Selk told you to do when he used creation magic for you. Is that a hint at the fact that Square Enix lied and the 12 are the ancients who worked with Vanna to summon Hydaelyn, or is it something else? Everyone thinks of what they believe holds knowledge, and as expected for Graha, Snogum, and Krau, they manifest books. Derek gets an old treasure map, and the Warrior of Light gets a tombstone. All of the items will work the same, and what the group will have to do is take them to special stones that are scattered around Eorzea. They contain the information needed to finish the writing on the monument, and all any of you have to do is hold the objects the gods gave you up to the stones, and they'll download the info. The 12 scattered the stones across the world so mortals wouldn't find out the secrets, but people found the stones and started using them as objects of worship called the Marks of the 12. That makes them easy to find since everyone there knows what they are. They're located in the 3 major city-states, Kurthus and Mordona, so it'll be faster if you all split up and go to different areas. And oddly enough, some of the gods want to tag along with you. Nafika doesn't want to bother any of you like that, but Minfina and Halone do. Obviously, all of the mortals want them to come along, so that settles things, except for one new development. Azima, Birago, Rogger, and Nathal show up in their animal forms wanting to tag along too. Since 3 gods will stay in the realm, things will be fine, so everyone groups up and heads off, leaving Derek, the Warrior of Light, Halone as a little ice wolf, and Minfina in rabbit form to head to Kurthus and Mordona. Derek is kind of confused by why the gods decided to set the 2 of you off traveling together, but Minfina says it's simply because the 2 of you make the most interesting group. One is a hero who's killed gods, and another is an explorer who's seen more of the world than most, which does make them into an interesting set of traveling companions. Between Kurthus and Mordona, you should find the marks of Minfina, Thaliak, and Halone, so along with Derek's little pet, who after the 2 gods' interaction with is either just a regular creature or a god who's really good at hiding himself, you all head to Mordona to draw out the info in Thaliak's mark. The Warrior of Light handles the simple task, while Minfina gives you a little bit of info about the stones themselves. They're indestructible, and just like the monument in their realm, they've been there forever. The 12 made them because of the love that people felt for them, as well as how the 12 felt about the star itself. The fact that people pray to them is an outward expression of the bond that mortals share with the 12 and by extension the star itself. Since you're all on a timetable, you make your way to Kurthus where you find Halone's mark. Derek draws out this one, which gives the Warrior of Light time to chat with the gods, and this time Halone has a question for her, since Minfina claims her appearance has gotten more imposing over the last 1,000 years, and some strange statues have appeared in her domain that weren't there before, which makes sense when you think about how Halone is prayed to when people want to get strong enough to protect what they want. Halone does like the fact that people seek her out for strength, but she hated watching them use her name while fighting the dragons. She's not judging them because she doesn't think that's the 12's job, but she just didn't like it. She doesn't seem to get that for you not to like something, you've already judged it as bad. Whether you're right or not, whether you like it or not, everyone judges everyone. And if it's not a deity's job to do that, then I don't really know who's supposed to do it. Even when their names are invoked and they give their help, it's only at the request of mortals, not to influence them to do things. And each time the mortals pray, that dictates the form that the 12 take. Before they can get around to saying more, Derek finishes getting the info from Halone's mark, and Minfina rushes off to see her own mark by the Steel Vigil. Turns out someone's there praying to Minfina at that very moment. When he's done, he sees the Warrior of Light, and recognizes her as the person who had hunted down the members of the cult, the Lambs of Dalamud. The group had abducted people and committed all types of crimes, but this man swears that he hadn't. That wasn't even why he had joined them in the first place. At first they had just prayed that Dalamud would take their souls to paradise, which was still a little crazy, but everything changed when the moon had turned red. People in the group started to believe that Dalamud was their savior, and they needed to prove their loyalty to him or they'd suffer. They were being tempered by Bahamut, but none of them actually knew that, and they ended up becoming a dangerous cult. This particular man had been a merchant in Ul'dah, but he wasn't savage enough to make it in that climate. That's why he had started praying to Menphina, hoping that he could be blessed with courage from her wolf. That was the only thing that made him be able to live with how much of a failure he was, but he lost that when he got labeled as crazy just because the Lambs of Dalamud had started doing bad stuff and he was guilty by association. The man is so desperate for someone better than he is to guide him that he stoops to begging the Warrior of Light to point him in the right direction, since no god will even answer his prayers. As a surprise to everyone, it's Derek who hits the man with some words of wisdom, telling him not to give mortals the same standing in his life that he gives to the gods. People like the Warrior of Light may be strong, but they're still mortals. They make mistakes, get scared, and they fail just like everyone else. That strength doesn't make them any better than any other person either, and for the former Lamb of Dalamud, Derek thinks he needs to take time, travel around while keeping the faith in Menphina, and he'll figure out his place in all of this. The words help the man, and he gets the feeling that Menphina had guided you all there in his hour of need to get him straight, which she literally did, and he heads off to seek out his own path. As he leaves, Menphina whispers a blessing to him that will undoubtedly help him on his journey. Derek doesn't feel bad about offering the man unsolicited advice, and now that he's gone, the Warrior of Light draws the information out of Menphina's mark. After seeing how the man had acted, Menphina lets you know that none of the 12 want their existence to cause problems for mortals. But with them being the way they are because of mortals' beliefs, sometimes that's unavoidable. One man's blessing could be another man's curse. Her wolf's very existence came from mortal worship, but none of the 12 are all-powerful. They can't grant every wish, but they do always hear their prayers, and they do care. With that said, you've all completed your part, which means you can head back to the Phantom Realm, but Derek is kind of worried about Cryle. G'raha had seemed worried about her too because something was clearly bothering the woman. Derek wants to go check on her, so the four of you head to Gridania since that's where she went with Birago and Nafika. When you get to Gridania, Menphina can sense Nafika and Birago, but for some reason they've all split up. Since Nafika is closer, you all track her down first. Apparently she got separated from the others when she stopped to listen to the elementals. Since she's the patron of the land, they were pretty eager to tell her about current events, but while that's the reason why she ended up separated from the group, it shouldn't have stopped her from sensing Birago and tracking him down. She didn't because Cryle wanted to deal with the marks without Birago and Nafika looking over her shoulder, so they gave her space, but Birago followed her just in case something went wrong. He's out in the area called the South Shroud, so you all head off to find him. He's not hard to track down even in his Spriggan form, but he is surprised to see you all there. Cryle has already drawn out the information from Birago's stone, and now she's headed for Althix. Birago had been following her, but he lost sight of her when you all showed up. You know where she's going, so to make your journey there easier, Birago summoned some eagles for you and Derek to ride. Cryle's already at the stone when you all get there, and she's happy to see that it's you, especially since she had been worried about Odin popping up. Some people have forgotten that Odin still prowls around the area murdering people. Derek wants to know why she sent the gods away, but it's mainly because she wanted to figure things out on her own, which is technically what the 12 told you all to do. Despite telling you to do it yourself, they told you all where to go and even came with you, which is not really what she or the students of Baldessian stand for. They don't want help finding the answers, they want to figure it all out, and she kinda wants to experience a bit of what you do as an adventurer, braving danger alone and proving yourself. Now that Derek understands, he's not worried anymore, so you all head back to Quarry Mill to wait for Cryle to finish what she's doing. While you're waiting, Derek wonders why he suddenly started to take an interest in other people's problems. When Cryle makes it back, you all head back to the Phantom Realm to meet up with the others. After telling G'raha and Snogum about your little trip, the 12 return to their sanctums, and you all put the knowledge you've gathered into the monument, which lets Cryle finally be able to read it. The first thing it says is that since the 12 exist as the will of the star, they can be influenced by hopes and prayers, so they marked out their duty on the monument so they would never stray from their purpose. Birago will reign over construction and encourage people to build things. Rhalgr will be the god of destruction and strengthen the star's heart and guide mankind's regeneration. Azima will be the goddess of the sun, maintain its light, and reveal the truth to everyone. Nalthal will rule over the underground and reveal the treasures in the world and what's inside of people. Nafika is the goddess of fertility and will fill the land with life. Althic will govern space and time and keep the star progressing forward. Halone will rule ice and tranquility. Menphina will rule the moon, controlling the change from night to day, as well as be the goddess of love. Thaliak will control the rivers and fill people's minds with wisdom. Nemea will rule the stars and control the seasons and fate. Lemalayan will rule the seas and tides and push people to explore the world. Ashan will rule the mountains and travel alone to understand the solitude of the mortals. And the last one, who's not named, will be charged with watching and standing guard over his prisoner forever. That means the 12 aren't 12 at all, they're actually 13. The monument brings about more questions than answers, like what do the 12 mean by the fact that they could lose sight of their duties? Is it possible that what mortals want could change them enough that the 12 forget their real purpose? The fact that they can be changed and have been changed makes that very, very likely. And after dealing with Dynamis, the Warrior of Light has seen on multiple occasions how someone's will can be made manifest. The events with the Omicron beast tribe showed that. So are the 12 creatures made entirely of Dynamis? And if they are, that likely means they are not the ancients. The 12 can't predict how people will change them, but the monument will always be there to remind them of who they're supposed to be. They also said they endure by the will of the star, and that of course meant Hydaelyn. But Hydaelyn's dead, so are the 12 fading away, or was Hydaelyn's prayer that the 12 fulfilled their duty, and without her, they're being swayed at a greater rate by the will of the mortals? Kral thinks that when Hydaelyn sundered the world, she ordered the people who worked with her to do what they could to maintain the stability of the world. If that's the case, it means that the 13th member of the 12 is actually the Watcher on the moon. The best way to find out is to ask him, and since there are 3 gods left in the Phantom Realm that you haven't dealt with at all, it may be best to get all the information you can before you face them, since you don't know what will happen once you do. So before you all run off to chat with the Watcher, Kral and G'raha will head back to Sharlayan to study the data that you gathered while the Warrior of Light gets some rest, because she'll definitely have more difficult fights ahead. Derek, despite being a loner, seems to be sad that your adventure together will likely be over soon, since he realized that he actually enjoys your company, but he promises that he'll stay to see things through to the end. But all things come to an end, and knowing that makes them all the more enjoyable while they're happening. Derek still hasn't heard anything from Kral and G'raha, but he's pretty sure they're working as fast as they can to go over all of the stuff you found in the Phantom Realm. But since this is all uncharted territory, it's not like this process will happen overnight. So while you're waiting for news, Derek figures it'll be a good idea to head back to Amphalos and check on Snogin. It's not like you have anything better to do, so you go to check on the woman with him. She's focused so much on what she's doing that it takes her a minute to notice you and the fact that G'raha and Kral aren't there. Since she's a researcher like them, Derek finds it kinda weird that she doesn't want to go and help them out instead of hanging around by herself. But she always liked being in the field more than being cooped up in an office. She thinks better like that, which I can relate to. Plus she had been hoping to speak with the 12 again, but they only show up when they want to, and apparently they didn't want to talk to her. But she remembers them saying that they wanted to talk to you, so if you tried, they might answer. Since you don't have much to do while you wait for the others, you give it a try, and they do show up. Although aside from a few words of encouragement and praise for your accomplishments, they don't really tell you much. The conversations do give Kral and G'raha time to show up, and they found something that gives them the impression that you might want to be careful before you continue your sparring sessions with the 12. When you fought them, the gods burned up so much energy that they started to burn through their own essence. They wanted to do it, which makes the whole thing more odd, so Kral figures it may be better to avoid going another round with them until you know what their plans are. That means you need to take your trip to the moon to see if the Watcher is in fact the 13th member of the 12 that you had read about. Kral's already gotten permission to use the Tower of Babel for the trip, so there's nothing stopping you all from heading up there. The Watcher's pretty excited to have so many guests, and he's not against answering Kral's questions about the 12, starting with the fact that he is indeed the 13th member. He doesn't have all of the answers since he is one of Vanah's creations who doesn't have all of his memories of the old days. Hydaelyn made the 12 just like she made him, and their mission was to help guide the sundered world forward. They all resemble people that Vanah knew in the past, and they all believe that the new beings that were born from the sundering should be the ones to choose which path the new world would go once they got everything set in motion. The people Vanah picked all had specialties and personalities that were suited for their jobs, and those personalities, along with the prayers of the mortals, sculpted the 12 into the forms that you've seen. Since they've been around for a very, very long time, the billions of prayers have made them look a lot different from what they started out as. Despite all of their changes, they still followed Vanah's orders and avoided intervening in mortal affairs. However, since their creator is dead and the final days have come and gone, the 12 have come up with their own plan. The Watcher won't tell you what it is, but he promises that it definitely won't hurt mortals in the least. In fact, it will probably help them in the end, meaning you can beat the crap out of them without worrying about dooming the world. Since you now know the truth, you all head back to Omphalos. When you get back to the place, something has changed. The gods' avatars are gone, but before Kral can figure out why, the last two sanctums open, and two of the gods who you hadn't seen before, Lemalayan and Thaliak, show up claiming that their preparations are complete. Thaliak confirms what the Watchers said about why they were made. Since their job was to preserve the balance of reality, they made Omphalos in the Phantom Realm and their sanctums all throughout Eorzea to serve that purpose. That part G'raha understands, but what he doesn't get is why the 12 are burning through their power fighting you when that will make their job harder to do. That's a good question, but Derek has an answer for you, since in a plot twist that was worthy of M. Night Shyamalan, that is to say that it was obvious from the beginning of the story, Derek was Oshan all along. And for some reason, even though he spent all of his time in human form wandering around among mortals, he still didn't realize that bards didn't wear summoner's horns, or fly, or look nearly that cool. No shade to bards, but there's nothing that they've done to have a god up their cool factor like this. He apologizes for hiding his true nature from you all, but he figured that if you knew what they were really planning, you wouldn't have agreed to fight them. He also apologizes for the fact that he has to leave his little koala monkey with you now. Once you face the last 3 members of the 12 in combat, they'll tell you what all of this was really for. So as per usual, you grab a group of adventurers and head into the lair to fight more gods, which at this point in time is so common for you that it should only slightly raise the Warrior of Light's blood pressure. The final sanctum is just as beautiful as you might expect. The place looks like a futuristic version of Venice, Italy, but the beautiful scenery is hard to admire when Thaliak uses it to try and drown you. When you've dealt with him, you face Lemalayan, who is Poseidon if he doesn't get his morning coffee, meaning she stabs you with a trident, tries to drown you, then summons sea creatures to eat you. When you're done with her, you fight Oshan, who is definitely the coolest bard you've ever seen, but that doesn't stop him from getting wrecked, even though his turning shadow clones was a pretty cool and annoying technique. With the final member of the 12 beaten, you're brought back to Omphalos, where they're all waiting for you. In what was the most cliche final boss ever, they fuse together forming one being that you and your friends proceed to beat the crap out of. Once you've overpowered the combined version of the 12, they finally tell you what the whole point of all of this was. They just wanted to give all of their power to the star as a blessing for mankind. They've been alive for 12,000 years, and through that time the prayers of mortals has made them exponentially more powerful, and by fighting you, they can give all of that stored power to the planet where it might cause new life to sprout up. In other words, the 12 had you fight them so they could die, because what they're doing doesn't in fact have any measurable benefits for the people of Atheris. In fact, it could turn out to be a bad thing for the people, because imagine what chaos would spread through the world if the Warrior of Light, the people's champion, comes back home and says, "Hey guys, you know those gods that you've been worshiping since our world began? Yeah, I killed those." You'd become public enemy number 1 overnight. Now, in the practical sense, the 12 not intervening in mortal affairs meant them having their own individuality didn't matter anyway. And considering how many times the world nearly ended under their watch without them doing anything about it, they hadn't exactly stabilized the world either. So them fading away and allowing mortal prayers to feed the star itself will be more beneficial for the people in the long run. So the 12 say their goodbyes and return to the star. But again, to nobody's surprise, Oshan decides that he wants to stay. He reassumes his mortal form, but this time it's not just an illusion. He used all of his godly powers in your battle, so now he's just a man like any other, save for the fact that he has thousands of years of memories and experiences to draw on. He plans on going back to traveling the world like before, but instead of avoiding people like he did the last time, this time he plans on making friends and exploring the world that way. But before he heads off on his new journey, he decides to move the home for the 12's hopes from Omphalos to a place connected to the world of men. That place being the Sanctum of the 12 in the E-Shroud. With that done, Kral and the others head back to Sharlayan, where they can figure out just what they should report about this mission, while Derek heads off to explore the world with new eyes. This concludes the story of Myths of the Realm. If you enjoyed it, help me out by leaving a like, a comment, and sharing the video. That really helps with the algorithm, just like clicking on another one of my videos right after this one does. And if you really want to show your support, you can buy me a coffee through the link in the description, because caffeine is the only thing that keeps me going. I greatly appreciate it, and I'll see you all next time.